I'm not really sure when my love affair with baking started. My dad's a scientist and my mom's an artist, and I guess baking has always felt like a common compromise between the two. I think it's that the baking process has balance to it. You have to follow directions to ensure everything is in proportion. But to make something truly inspired, you have to trust your instincts and be creative and take risks. You have the latitude to make things up and try new flavors. And if something goes wrong, the worst thing that can happen is that things will look a bit weird or won't rise right. Because if you put enough sugar in, it will probably still taste fine. When I was younger, baking was a way to connect. It was a method to cover up a social anxiety other people didn't see. To reach across the space I felt existed between myself and others, and make myself central to experiences I felt inherently peripheral to. In pictures throughout my life, my back is to the camera as someone else blows out the candles in whatever I've created. Baking the birthday cake was a way to ensure an invitation to the birthday party. At my first job post-university, I used the same tactic. Each Sunday, I would bake lavender cookies or shortbread or a crumble, and each Monday I would be rewarded with a series of visitors to my desk. I grew to know my colleagues based on their flavor preferences. Bob, our COO, liked almonds. Phil from accounting loved cherries, and Sarah always took seconds of lemon curd. On my last day of that first job, my director gave me 2 pieces of advice. The first was that I had too expressive a face, that everyone always knew exactly what I was thinking. She was 100% right, and the feedback didn't come as a surprise. But the second was that I should stop bringing baked goods to work. And that took me aback. My baking had allowed me to forge relationships throughout the organization and given me face time with senior execs. How could any of that be a bad thing? Then she asked if I had ever seen a man cut a cake at an office party. Ever watched one walk around with his hands full of slices on paper plates asking who wanted one? And I realized I hadn't. She said if I was always focused on giving out food at the office, I would never be the one having an important discussion over it. After that conversation, I started to doubt myself. Not because of my expressive face. That's a lifelong cross to bear. But because I didn't know how to reconcile who I was with what I wanted to become. Baking felt inherently feminine in a way that seemed small and silly and antithetical to success. Making a cake seemed at odds with making an impact. How could a passion for human rights and a passion for pies live in one person? How could I be soft in a world that was so hard? I began to fear that being a baker meant that I would always be holding the cake, never blowing out the candles. That being a woman meant that I would always be setting the table instead of sitting at it. Professionally, I started working around the world in areas of social justice and public health, eventually settling into women's rights. I spoke about our cause with just the right amount of conviction. I wore power skirts and high heels and lipstick. I took up space and I wasn't overly warm. I learned to control my expressive face. No one would ever know what I was thinking again unless I wanted them to. I hid all my soft parts away, filed down my rough edges, swallowed my extremes. I was a strong woman, perfectly enough, perfectly not too much. But on the weekend, after I had sent reports to people in different time zones, I would put on flip-flops and sneak down to the market and buy flour and cream so I could make blueberry scones. It was a shameful secret, and I filed it away with all the others. Alongside my B for baking was E for emotional and excitable, personality traits I kept carefully in check. C for crying, a sin I would only commit behind closed doors. P for just pretty enough to be listened to, but not enough to be distracting. And M for the motherhood I wasn't sure I would ever let myself want, given how it might impact my career. On the other side of the room were another set of files. S for all the times I stayed silent when I should have said something. J for all the instances where I joked along because I didn't know what else to do. L for the way I laughed a little too loudly when my boss touched my knee. And F for freeze, because in the world of fight or flight that was and is my go-to move. My shame-filled filing cabinets took up my whole living room. There's no space to move around all the parts of myself I thought I needed to hide. In children, the capacity to feel shame develops between the ages of 2 and 3. 2 years old and they understand guilt. 2 years old and they're already being taught which parts of themselves to hide and which parts are for popular consumption, which experiences are palatable and which are unsightly. I've heard that shame is just anger turned inward, but I don't think that's exactly right. It implies that the person experiencing it is an active player in their own suffering, when it's the world around us that has taught us to bite our tongues. In reality, shame is a tool of homogenization. We internalize because not doing so puts us at risk. Because saying our truths is a sacrifice many of us cannot afford to make. Not only because others might be deaf to our realities, but because saying them aloud may diminish our capacity to have our voices heard in the future. I was a woman passionate about women's rights and still scared to exhibit any wrong aspect of my femininity. Scared it would keep me from a seat at the table. Scared it would keep me from being taken seriously in conversations about the construct of gender itself. It's not that I didn't see the contradiction. It's that I didn't see a way to dismantle it. I thought that the only way to change societal expectations was to conform and creep inside of structures and shift them slowly from the inside out. But in forfeiting parts of myself, I wasn't reshaping the structures that had created the shame. The shame I was filing away was reshaping me. There is something else that notably happens around a child's second birthday. They begin to feel empathy, to see others in all of their pain and all of their chaos and all of their dreams and meet them where they are. Accept them for who they are. Find themselves in the scheme of humanity. Perhaps our capacity to experience empathy and our capacity to feel shame are intrinsically linked when we develop them. Not because we need to feel shame to extend empathy, but the opposite. Because we need to extend empathy in order to alleviate shame. Many of us struggle to fit in to this confusing and treacherous world. We see our own inner workings, all of our deviances, all of our weakest moments. We feel shame, such intense, brutal shame, for not fitting an ideal we had no hand in creating, an image that doesn't match our desires, let alone our values. We see our own humanity, and it looks wrong. And thus, when we see it in others, we feel disgust. We turn away from their vulnerability. We reinforce their shame. We forget our birthright of compassion so quickly while accepting society's expectations of us. I'm trying to shift my perspective to see people in the context of their humanity instead of in spite of it. And it's really, really hard. Empathy is a muscle that can be extended, and there are parts of mine that has absolutely atrophied. It feels permissive and weak and small to accept my own flaws. And the world becomes a lot more nuanced and confusing when people's beauty lies in their imperfections. But in listening to the volumes of my silences, my jaw is unlearning how to bite my tongue. And I am learning that my worth doesn't come in my ability to feel flawless, but in being human. Leaning into other shortcomings, I'm learning that there's nothing more stunningly amazing than the areas where we fall short. And that I'm more comfortable with the tapestry of humanity and my portion of it when I filter out ideas of what it should look like. It's so confusing. Everything seems out of control. It's come at the cost of seats at many tables. Tables I used to aspire toward, and seats I didn't know I was giving up. But it feels right. And by clearing out my cabinets, I'm finding a living room I can invite people into. One where maybe I can build a table of my own. I no longer feel the need to bake a cake in order to be invited to the party. If you've received a cake from me, rest assured that isn't why. There are some parties I don't want to be invited to. And some parties I'm invited to that do not deserve a cake. But even though I now share it selectively, I do still love to bake. It's taught me pride in what I have to bring to the table and perspective to appreciate what other people can teach me. The differences, the idiosyncrasies, the things that taste interesting are what make baking beautiful. In my baking, I'm bold and creative and strong and soft in different proportions all at once for different recipes. I'm shameless. I don't know if I can be that person outside of the kitchen, but I want to try. I'm still figuring out how to reconcile all of the parts of me into one whole. I'm still trying to resist the urge to hide the mess under the bed. I still wonder whether, by speaking my experiences aloud, I'll be seen as fragile. And I question why fragility is something I fear when I know in reality it's all any of us ever are. I don't have the answers. I'm still a work in progress. I always will be.